Hello, ninth grade. How's everything with you? E aí, galera do nono ano, tudo beleza com vocês? Espero que vocês estejam bem. Hoje vamos começar mais uma aula de inglês e como eu havia falado no vídeo anterior, hoje a gente vai ver o texto sobre Tom Sawyer, tá, galera? Que, como eu falei, é um texto que vai ter uma alusão a todas as palavras que a gente já aprendeu ao longo dessas videoaulas, tá? Como aparece aí na tela de vocês, é uma história, tá? O nome dela em inglês é The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, As Aventuras de Tom Sawyer, que é esse garoto que aparece aí na tela. E as palavras-chave são as palavras que você já conhece, que a gente já fez algumas atividades sobre elas e você já tem um vocabulário suficiente para poder ler esse texto com essas palavras aí. Essas palavras vão ajudar vocês a terem suporte com esse texto e compreensão dele, tá, galera? Bom, para esse vídeo não ficar tão extenso, visto que a história não é tão pequena assim, tá, galera? Eu vou apresentar hoje somente uma página sobre esse texto, tá? Para vocês, ou seja, só uma atividade sobre ele. E aí eu vou espelhar essa história para vocês agora em inglês com o áudio oficial do livro. E com efeito vocês também vão poder acompanhar juntamente com a história escrita, tá, galera? Assim vocês têm contato tanto com a oralidade, que é o áudio, como com a escrita. Bom, sem mais delongas, vou começar agora a história. Cada imagem representa, como aparece na tela de vocês, um áudio, tá? E cada áudio vai aparecer também a escrita do lado, perto da imagem, tá? Vocês podem acompanhar tanto no livro de vocês, como podem acompanhar aqui na nossa telinha, tá, galera? Vamos começar. Vou começar agora o áudio, fiquem atentos e acompanhem junto com a escrita.
The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Monday morning found Tom Sawyer miserable. Monday morning always found him so because it began another week's slow suffering in school. As Tom made his way to school after breakfast, he came upon the juvenile pariah of the village, Huckleberry Finn, son of the town drunkard. Tom hailed the romantic outcast. "Hi there! What's that you got?" "Dead cat." "My, he's pretty stiff. Say, what is dead cats good for, Huck?" "Good for? Cure warts with. Why, you take your cat and get in the graveyard, long about midnight where somebody that was wicked has been buried. Then you heave your cat after him and say, 'Devil follow corpse, cat follow devil, warts follow cat, I'm done with ye.' That'll fetch any wart." "Sounds right. When you going to try the cat? Tonight, or at old Hoss William's grave?" "Let me go with you?" "Of course, if you ain't afeard." The boys met that night at the cemetery. It was a graveyard of the old-fashioned Western kind. The boys talked little and soon found the sharp new heap they were seeking. They planted themselves within the protection of 3 great elms that grew in a bunch within a few feet of the grave. The hooting of a distant owl troubled the dead stillness. Some vague figures approached through the gloom. The 3 men reached the grave and stood within a few feet of the boys' hiding place. "Hurry, men!" Dr. Robinson urged in a low voice. Injun Joe and Muff Potter began digging. Finally, a spade struck upon the coffin with a dull, woody accent. Potter, though quite drunk, managed to pry the lid off with his knife. They got out the body and dumped it rudely on the ground. "Careful, you no-good half-breed," spat the doctor. Injun Joe spun on him, threatening the doctor with his fist. The doctor struck out suddenly. Potter dropped his knife and exclaimed, "Here now, don't you hit my pard!" And the next moment he began to grapple with the doctor. Injun Joe sprang to his feet and snatched up Potter's knife. The doctor seized the headboard of the grave and felled Popper to the earth with it. In that same instant, Injun Joe saw his chance and drove the knife to the hilt in the doctor's breast. Dr. Robinson reeled and fell partly upon the unconscious Potter, flooding him with blood. The 2 frightened boys went speeding away in the dark. Minutes passed. Soon Potter began to stir and moan. Then he sat up and gazed around confusedly. the bloody weapon was in his hands. His eyes met Joe's. "Lord, how is this, Joe? I drank too much tonight. I can't remember what happened," he said. "Why, you two was scuffling. You snatched the knife and jammed it into the doctor just as he fetched you an awful clip. And here you've laid, as dead as a wedge till now." "Oh, I didn't know what I was a-doing. You won't tell, will you, Joe?" And the gravely misinformed Potter dropped on his knees before the true murderer, clasping his hands in appeal. The two boys flew on and on, toward the village, speechless with horror. They glanced backward over their shoulders as if they feared they might be followed. Tom said, "Hucky, you sure you can keep Mum?" "Tom, we got to keep Mum, you know that. That Injun devil wouldn't make any more of drowning us than a couple of cats, if we was to squeak about this and they didn't hang him." The next day, the whole village was electrified with the ghastly news. Dr. Robinson had been found dead with Muff Potter's knife in his chest. Potter had turned himself into the law that morning. The sheriff came along, ostentatiously leading Potter by the arm through the crowd that had gathered in the center of town. A low voice interjected itself above the murmur of the crowd. Injun Joe proclaimed he had witnessed the grisly deed right before his own eyes. He swore that Potter was indeed the murderer. Huckleberry and Tom stood dumb and staring as the stony-hearted liar reeled off his false statement. Every moment, they expected that the clear sky would deliver God's lightnings upon Joe's head. In subsequent days, Tom's guilt overwhelmed him. It kept him awake at nights and plagued him during the humid summer days. For a time, Tom's fear of Injun Joe compelled him to keep mum. When, at last, the murder trial came on in the court, the whole town was there. The counsel for the defense rose and said, "Call Thomas Sawyer!" An eruption of surprised murmurs ensued. Huckleberry began to tremble. Tom began his tale, hesitatingly at first, but as he warmed to the subject, his words flowed more and more easily. As the story reached its climax, the boy said, "And as the doctor fetched the board around and Muff Potter fell, Injun Joe jumped with the knife and—" There was a loud crash in the courtroom. Quick as lightning, Injun Joe sprang for a window. He tore his way through all opposers and was gone. Following the trial, Tom's fear of Injun Joe began to overwhelm him. He and Huck decided that a spirited hunt for buried treasure would help clear their heads. They gathered up a crippled pick and a shovel. Then they set out towards the town's haunted house. Tom reasoned this was the only place for a sensible thief to hide treasure. When they arrived, the boys crept to the door and took a trembling peep. Next, they wanted to look upstairs. They were about to go down and begin work when two men entered. The voice of one made the boys gasp and quake. It was Injun Joe. The boys stretched themselves upon the floor. They lay waiting in a misery of fear. Joe said, "We'll do that dangerous job, then go for Texas. Meantime, I'll bury our loot in that corner." Digging with his knife, Joe struck upon something unexpected. "Man, it's money!" The two men examined a handful of the coins from this newly excavated box. They were gold. The boys above were as excited as themselves and as delighted. "Now you won't need to do that job," said the second man. "Nah, that job's not about money. It's about revenge. Now let's move this pile to my den." "You mean number 1? "No, number 2. Shortly afterward, the men slipped out of the house. Tom and Huck rose up, weak but vastly relieved. Then, a ghastly thought occurred to Tom. "Revenge? What if he means us, Huck?" The adventure of the day mightily tormented Tom's dreams that night. Tom sought out Huck first chance he got the next day. Together, they reasoned that number 2 was probably a room in a tavern, and so they went along to inquire. The tavern keeper's young son told them that number 2 was kept locked all the time. He never saw anybody go into it or come out of it, except at night. Tom and Huck eagerly devised a scheme. Thursday night, Tom and Huck were ready for their adventure. They crept in the gloom toward the tavern. Huck stood sentry. Tom cautiously felt his way into the alley. Suddenly, Tom came tearing by him. "Run for your life!" The boys never stopped till they reached the lower end of the village. As soon as Tom got his breath, he said, "Huck, I most stepped into Injun Joe's hand." He was lying there, drunk and sound asleep on the floor. "Say, Tom, did you see the box?" "No time. Looky here, Huck. Let's not try that thing any more till we know Injun Joe's not in there. It's too scary. Now, if we watch every night, we'll be dead sure to see him go out sometime or other. Then we'll snatch that box quicker'n lightning." "Well, I'm agreed. I'll watch the whole night long. I'll do it every night, too. When I see them, I'll come fetch you." "Agreed, and good as wheat." Friday morning brought Tom a glad piece of news. Judge Thatcher's family had come back to town the night before. Both Injun Joe and the treasure sunk into secondary importance for the moment. Becky Thatcher, the judge's daughter, took the chief place in the boys' interest. Becky invited the town's children to a picnic. It was set for Saturday. The old steam ferry boat was chartered for the occasion. 3 miles below town, the ferry boat stopped at the mouth of a woody hollow and tied up. After the feast, the children determined that it was time to explore McDougal's cave. By and by, one group after another came straggling back to the mouth of the cave in time to meet the onset of dusk. Tired and content, the group crowded back onto the ferry for the ride home. Huck was already upon his watch when the ferry boat's lights went glinting past the wharf. A noise fell upon his ear. The alley door closed softly. 2 men brushed by him. One had something under his arm. It must be that box. With no time to alert Tom, Huck set off after them in quiet pursuit. The men stopped within 5 steps of the stile leading into Widow Douglas's grounds. Huck shortened his distance. Now there was a voice, a very low voice. It was Injun Joe's voice. "Damn her. Maybe she's got company. There's lights late as it is." A deadly chill went to Huck's heart. This, then, was the revenge job. Maybe these men were going to murder Widow Douglas. Her husband was rough on me. He had me horsewhipped. But I'll take it out of her. We'll wait till the lights go out. There's no hurry. Huck turned in his tracks and flew to the closest house, the Welshman's. He banged at the door. Upon entering, he told them all he had just witnessed. 3 minutes later, the old man and his sons, well armed, were up the hill. There was an explosion of firearms and a cry, but the 2 men got away. It wasn't until church on Sunday that Becky and Tom were discovered missing. Children were anxiously questioned. One young man finally blurted out his fear that they were still in the cave. The alarm swept through the town. Within 5 minutes, the ferry boat was ordered out. 200 men poured down high road and river toward the cave. On the day of the picnic, Tom and Becky wandered off together in the cave. Anxious to show off, Tom led them farther and farther into the mysterious tunnels. Before long, they were sorely lost. The children settled to rest by a natural spring. Their hope was nearly extinguished along with their last piece of candle. As the weary time dragged on, Tom was struck by an idea. he took a kite line from his pocket and tied it to a rocky projection. Tom unwound the line as he groped along. Suddenly, not 20 yards away, a human hand holding a candle appeared from behind a rock. That hand was followed by the body it belonged to, Injun Joe. Tom was paralyzed with fear. He could not move for a long moment. Then he quietly crept back to Becky. A long while later, Tom's hunger overcame his fear. He needed to find a way out. Using the kite string, Tom carefully explored the dark maze of tunnels. Exhaustion silenced his cry of relief when a speck of daylight told him he'd discovered the way out. About a fortnight after their momentous escape from the cave, Tom stopped off to see Becky. Judge Thatcher and some friends set Tom to talking. Someone asked him, ironically, if he wouldn't like to go to the cave again. Tom said he thought he wouldn't mind it. "Well, nobody will get lost in that cave anymore," said Judge Thatcher. "I had its big door sheathed with boiler iron 2 weeks ago and triple locked. And I've got the keys." Tom turned as white as a sheet. "What was the matter with you, Tom?" "Oh, Judge! Injun Joe's in the cave!" Within a few minutes, the news had spread. A dozen skiff-loads of men were on their way to McDougal's cave. When the cave door was unlocked, a sorrowful sight presented itself. Injun Joe lay stretched upon the ground, dead, with his face close to the crack of the door. Tom and Huck glanced at each other with relief. "Hucky," Tom whispered, "I'm right sure I saw that treasure in the cave. Ain't no way we can get at it now. Judge Thatcher's door got us locked out."
Bom, galera, essa foi a história do Tom Sawyer. Espero que vocês tenham acompanhado bem o texto e que o áudio tenha ajudado vocês a compreender um pouco a pronúncia, tá, galera? Bom, como eu sei que a história é um pouco longa, tá? A gente vai dirigir um vídeo hoje somente a essa leitura. Quero que vocês em casa leem bem esse texto, acompanhem ele com o áudio, tá? E na próxima aula, visto que hoje é terça, na quarta-feira eu estarei postando uma outra videoaula referente a atividades sobre esse texto, tá, galera? Para que vocês não tenham que ficar sobrecarregados com um texto grande, lendo e ter que fazer atividade no mesmo dia, tá? Então hoje vai ser uma videoaula só sobre esse vídeo, que vocês possam estar lendo ele com cuidado em casa. E na quarta-feira será postado um vídeo sobre uma atividade referente ao Tom Sawyer que está no livro de vocês. Se de antemão vocês quiserem se antecipar, não tem problema, tá? É uma escolha de vocês. Porém, eu vou deixar essa videoaula de hoje somente a esse vídeo, para que vocês possam dedicar esse dia hoje para ler esse texto e entenderem ele bem, tá? E quarta-feira vocês vão receber uma atividade do livro mesmo sobre esse texto do Tom Sawyer, tá, galera? Bom, então é tudo por hoje em virtude do tamanho que o texto é. Eu sei que o texto não é pequeno, tá? Que vocês possam ter uma leitura proveitosa e possam apresentar bem as ideias, tá, para vocês, e que vocês possam estar aí dedicando o seu tempo para essa leitura. So guys, see you next class. Have a nice reading and have a nice day. Take care.